Yeah, the COVID crisis has had a very negative impact on the UK and world economy and on business, both here and internationally. That being said, we have seen a turnaround. If we take the UK, it's clear that the UK economy started to pick up in May. That has continued through in the last few months. So we are seeing recovery. But at the same time, because we are still in a vaccine gap, it's not going to be possible for the economy to return to its pre-crisis levels for some time. Sectors such as hospitality sector and other sectors impacted by social distancing will not return to normal. So therefore, even though it is a recovery, and it's a recovery that's strong in some sectors, I don't think it will be until the end of next year that we see the UK economy back to pre-crisis levels. Even though my views are cautious, they're optimistic versus the consensus. Now, the important thing is that even though the crisis is still difficult to predict, we now know more about the virus than we did back in March, February. It's also evident that it was the lockdown itself that caused the biggest negative impact on the economy. But it's important as we move forward to recognise that the policy stimulus, both monetary and fiscal, has been not only welcome but necessary. I would also advocate the policy stimulus having to continue for some time. That is, interest rates remaining low, the Bank of England continuing to print money. And also I would advocate that the Chancellor extends the furlough scheme to those sectors of the economy that cannot return to business as usual because of the absence of a vaccine. So overall the economy has suffered, but it is starting to recover, but it will still take some time to return to business as usual for all sectors. As we start to emerge from the crisis, there are two areas that we need to keep a focus on. One is unemployment and the other is small businesses, although both are interlinked. In terms of unemployment unfortunately is set to rise. It's set to rise both as the furlough scheme ends, but also because I think many firms, small firms in particular, will be burdened with a high amount of debt as we move through next year. Therefore, the rising unemployment challenge needs to be addressed. We need to learn lessons from the early 80s, particularly about the need to provide training, but we also need to learn lessons in terms of the last crisis, post the global financial crisis, about the need to avoid austerity and to continue to provide a policy stimulus. When it comes to small firms clearly have been impacted very hard by all the various measures such as social distancing. But I think the biggest challenge is yet to come. We've seen necessarily help provided to small firms, but I'd like to see some of the debt written off next year, that the loans provided through, for instance, the bounce back scheme, in my view, probably should be considered as grants. It would be expensive, but otherwise the challenge is this. As we move into 2021, many small firms will not be able to take on new staff, not be able to invest, but will be nursing a high amount of debt as we emerge from this crisis. So providing further help on both the jobs front and on the small business front, I think is necessary and should be a key focus of attention. Is the city dead? Well, the answer to that is no, but undoubtedly some things will change. I think there are two different facets to the answer to this question. First is that this whole debate has highlighted the importance of the whole creative arts sector. The creative sector accounts for 5.6% of GDP. That's pretty important. But it also provides a whole ecosystem, a high dynamism, which makes people want to take London, want to live, work, and actually visit London. So protecting the arts and the creative sector, I think, is an important part of this story, both in terms of not only the direct benefit those areas provide, but the indirect benefit they provide in making the city, both here in London, but also across the whole country, a place where people want to live, work, and visit. If we actually look at the city itself and urban areas, recent years we've seen an increase in urbanisation. More people have wanted to work in the city. There's been a magnetic pull of younger people from the rural areas, from the coastal areas to big towns to big cities. Undoubtedly, there will be some things that change. In the vaccine gap phase, people might want to work more from home. But what we actually have seen is that maybe some sectors, some businesses might find it easier, maybe cheaper, maybe more productive to give that greater flexibility. I still think people will want to work and meet together, but maybe in the future we see greater flexibility in terms of people spending more time working from home. But this creates other challenges as well as an opportunity. Challenge about the fact that not everyone has the ideal working environment at home, and therefore younger people or people in cramped accommodation must still be given the opportunity to be able to come in to work at the office if they so wish. And also broadband. Broadband doesn't work as well as it should, and that's a big challenge. Is the government breaking the law? Well, Brandon Lewis, the Minister, spoke to Parliament last week. He had to tell the truth. Naturally, one should always tell the truth, and particularly if you're talking to Parliament. So he did say that the government was going to break an international law, albeit in a small way, to paraphrase his words. So he was right to say that. But I think one needs to step back and say that naturally, one shouldn't advocate the UK breaking an international law. But at the same time, what's become clear in this whole debate is that the negotiations with the EU have not proceeded as well as they should. And there are aspects of the withdrawal agreement, Article 5, that suggests, for instance, the EU has not acted in good faith. So by that implication, it's not just the UK, but the EU who need to sort of address whether they could have upheld the withdrawal agreement in a, shall we say, a more proactive way. So the issue then is whether these differences should be resolved within the withdrawal agreement itself through the resolution mechanism, or whether the UK should act unilaterally. Now, of course, the very fact that the UK has actually triggered this debate might actually allow us to reach a trade agreement and agreement on other issues with the EU. But overall, clearly, we should not advocate breaking international law. But at the same time, it's quite clear that the integrity of the United Kingdom, which was something that was both in the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration that went alongside it, needs to be upheld. So it's trying to find a way through this issue that will be the ideal outcome, where the UK doesn't break international law, but at the same time resolves this issue regarding Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. But it does, at the end of the day, require the United Kingdom as well as the European Union to actually act in good faith in the negotiations. In terms of what the outcome will be, in terms of our negotiations, we've now had 8 rounds. They've been tortuous. It's always seemed likely from both a political and an economic perspective that a deal would be reached, because at the end of the day, good economics is good politics, and it makes sense for both the UK and the EU to reach a trade agreement. But if it's a bad outcome, then the UK still has the option of a clean break. Obviously, the withdrawal agreement has highlighted issues linked to that in terms of the relationship between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. But I would still expect to see a deal. Now, I must admit that compared to where we were in 2016, the journey to now surely should have been better. The last few years have shown Parliament and other parts of the UK, shall we say, establishment working against Brexit. But now we have a government with a majority that clearly is committed to leaving. And as we saw both in the last general election and in terms of the overall mood of the country, people want to get it done and move on to the next stage. That clearly suggests that in the future we need to have, to make it work, both a good relationship with the EU and also the ability for the UK to position itself internationally with other countries, to make trade deals with them, and for the UK to position itself domestically to set its economic agenda to suit what we want and what the electorate here at home wants. So what that means in terms of the deal is that a deal that allows us to both have a good relationship with the EU and still pursue our sovereignty internationally and domestically makes sense. But if the proposal ties our hands, then it makes more sense for the UK to opt for a clean break. But I would expect a deal to be worked out in coming months. Despite the considerable near-term uncertainty linked to both COVID and to Brexit, I am very optimistic about prospects for the UK and indeed for the global economy. But here at home in the UK, I think what we need to see is a clear economic vision. I'd like to see this vision focused on 3 arrows. And to make it work, we almost need to have a bullseye in each. One arrow is the whole area of fiscal policy. We need to have a credible fiscal agenda, avoiding austerity, avoiding tax increases. but at the same time recognising that we do need to control public spending and reduce debt to GDP gradually over time. The second arrow has to be focused on monetary and financial policy, because sound money is sensible, but at the same time we need monetary policy to provide a stimulus in the near term. And the third arrow is the whole supply side agenda, where the answer to your question really is encapsulated. That's about ensuring stronger economic growth and ensuring that more people share in success. So in addition to those two arrows I've mentioned about fiscal policy and monetary and financial policy, the third arrow has to focus on all the I's. More investment, increased innovation, increased infrastructure spending, particularly at a time when it is so cheap for the government to borrow, linked in particular to transport, opening up new areas of the economy, new areas of the country. And the other I is about the whole incentives, linked to tax and regulation, encouraging people to work, encouraging firms to invest. And if you get all those right, then the other I, reducing inequality, follows from that. So the whole I agenda, shall we say, innovation, investment, infrastructure, incentives, and reducing inequality are all part of that third arrow. Now, I'm positive because I can see in my mind what needs to be done. The challenge is to make sure that that is what happens. And clearly in the very near term, we have the uncertainty linked to the next stage of the virus and how we emerge from that, and the uncertainty linked to the trade negotiations and how we actually leave the EU in the future. In terms of the policy to help SMEs grow in this country, I don't think it's just one thing. I think there needs to be a whole framework in terms of a whole pro-growth policy agenda outlined in terms of my mind by the three arrows, in terms of the three arrows where we need to focus growth policy on: fiscal policy, monetary financial policy, and the whole supply side. But on top of that, for the small and medium-sized sector, I think the interaction with the banking and financial sector is key. The Macmillan Gap was highlighted in 1931 as a gap between what banks provided and what small firms needed in terms of finance. Last year, the Bank of England, in assessing the new financial framework, suggested that that gap might still be around £23–24 billion. Now, the debate here in Westminster is, at the Treasury, this is a demand side problem. It's because small firms don't really want to borrow. It's not a supply side problem because banks are prepared to lend. But when you talk to the small firms, they tell you access to finance is their biggest single challenge. And I think as we emerge from this COVID crisis, I think it's going to be a greater challenge than usual. Hence, as we emerge from this COVID crisis, I would argue that bounce back loans should be taken as grants, and that would allow those loans to be written off. It would be expensive, but it would set small firms on a stronger footing where they would therefore be able to employ more people and invest more. So the whole financial remit is vitally important for the SME sector in the UK to survive and thrive, and in particular how we emerge from this crisis in terms of ensuring that there is not a debt overhang for those small firms. When we look ahead here in the UK, I think it's important to stress that while the natural attention is on what will change as a result of this crisis, it's also vital not to lose sight of what will not change as a result of this crisis. Some of the pre-crisis global trends are already evident as re-emerging as key drivers in the future. In particular, the whole digital, data and industrial revolution in terms of artificial intelligence. That suggests that the UK needs to continue to focus on investment, innovation, and empowering the private sector to do more in this whole new technology space. Another key global trend is the shift in the balance of economic power. More and more of global growth in the future is likely to come from the Indo-Pacific. That's from India in the west to America in the east, if you think of the world in that respect. East Asia included within that, Japan, China. UK, and indeed the whole of Western Europe, needs to reposition themselves in this changing, growing global economy. And then on top of that, we are likely to see change as a result of COVID. I call it the 3 Gs: grassroots, green, and also geopolitics. Grassroots, more focus on the local. Green, more focus on the green agenda, already important beforehand, even more vital now. And the geopolitical issues because of the emergence of a G2, America and China. The UK needs to position itself in this global economy. We need to have a good future relationship with the EU, hence the importance of the Brexit talks. We need to position ourselves globally, not just a trade deal with Japan, but position ourselves with those growth economies in that Indo-Pacific region, including America, including China. And also, very importantly, a domestic agenda focused on levelling up, focusing on powering London post the COVID crisis, and really about achieving stronger, more sustained growth, allowing more people to share in success. It's doable, it's possible, but we need to have the clear policy agenda aimed at achieving this. It won't happen overnight, but it can, and I think it will happen. Well, the crisis was interesting because it highlighted the important role that the public sector can play. But what I think is vital as we look further ahead is not to have austerity, but to recognise the important role that the private sector plays. The private sector has to and must lead the recovery. And that's all about empowering small firms, not incurring high debts upon them as we come out of this crisis, but ensuring that the whole incentive system, tax and regulations, is conducive to small firms being allowed to grow. Outside of the EU, the UK has a much greater opportunity to set the current terrain to suit what we want here in the UK. And that should be about empowering the private sector, small firms, and actually seeing a dynamic economy where the public sector plays a key role, but so too, and increasingly does the private sector as well. So basically, important public sector, vital for the private sector to grow also.